Everyone, welcome back to Brewbound Frontlines, our weekly live stream check-in with beer industry leaders on the moves they're making in this fast-changing business climate amid the COVID-19 pandemic. I am Justin Kindle, the editor of Brewbound, and I'm joined as always on this socially distant social hour by my colleague, Jess Infante, who is still in a garden state of mind, still in front of a pineapple wall. What is up, Jess?
Hey, Justin, Evan, how are you?
I'm doing okay on this jam-packed news day. How are you holding up?
A little, frazzled from how jam-packed this news day was, but I think we survived, so.
We did. We're alluding to the $5 million offer in compromise that Anheuser-Busch InBev is paying the TTB for trade practice infractions or alleged trade practice violations related to sports sponsorships and entertainment sponsorships. Big news day, and we covered it all at brewbound.com. You can find the story over there. But today we're going to discuss a really cool collaboration between our friends at Border X Brewing and the Mujeres Brew Club in San Diego, aimed at empowering female brewers. We'll be joined today by Border X owners David and Carmen Favela, who will discuss the project as well as the effects of COVID-19 on their business. And then we'll be discussing the state of the industry with Heavy Seas CEO Dan Kopman. David and Carmen will also be hanging out for that conversation, so stay tuned there. Dan is one of the most plugged-in people in the beer industry, having served on the boards of the Brewers Association and the Beer Institute. Dan is also the co-founder of Schlafly Beer in St. Louis. We'll look ahead at the major issues facing the industry over the next 6 months, examine the role of trade groups in navigating these moments, and much more. To our viewers out there, though, if you have a question for one of or all of our panelists, shoot us a text at 617-336-8560. That's 617-336-8560. We'll get those answered for you. And finally, a plug for next week's show. We're going to have a full house. We'll be joined by Brooklyn Brewery brewmaster Garrett Oliver, as well as Julie Foster and Christina Oliva from Tired Hands, and Jennifer Glanville from Boston Beer, and Chula Vista Brewing founder Tim Parker. Wow, that is a packed show. We'll be discussing efforts to make this industry more representative, including the Michael Jackson Foundation for Brewing and Distilling Scholarship Fund, as well as Tired Hands Internship Program and Brewing the American Dream. I am running out of breath, so let's get to our show today. Border X owners David and Carmen Favela, thank you for being here. Thanks for being here, David.
Thank you so much for having us.
Carmen, we couldn't be happier to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
Dan Kopman, CEO of Heavy Seas, is also here. Thanks for being here, Dan. I think you're still on mute, Dan.
There he goes.
Thanks very much. Thanks to both of you, to Justin and to Jess. Thanks.
So here's the deal. The craft brewing industry is nowhere as diverse as any of us would like it to be. However, Border X's collaboration with the Mujeres Brew Club is an example of one company trying to lift up underserved communities. We're honored to have David and Carmen here to share. Carmen, could you give us a look behind the curtain of how the Mujeres Brew House project came together?
Sure, absolutely. The Mujeres Brew Club started about a year ago. It pretty much blossomed during Women's History Month last year. We've always tried to, celebrate women at Border X, and whether if that's with artists, musicians, and maybe women in the beer industry. I know we've done collaborations with Pink Boot Society. And last year was really crazy for the fact that we were opening up a second brewery out in LA. I think it was actually the weekend of our grand opening, and I kind of felt that we didn't do enough to celebrate women. And the idea just kind of flourished. We were actually in a hotel in LA, and I looked at David and I said, David, what do you think about doing a women's beer club? And he's, he said, well, what does that mean? I said, I honestly don't know. I'm like, I don't know, but I'm sure I can figure it out. And so we talked a little bit about it, and he gave me the green light. I needed a host. Obviously, I can't, take everything on. And the only way that Mujeres Brew Club, could have flourished as much as it has is by having an amazing host. And the host that we were able to bring on is Esthela Davila. And Esthela, I'm not sure if some of you are, know her, but she's a Latina. She was born and raised in Barrio Logan in San Diego, and which is where Border X is. And she's been very active in the beer scene for the last few years, doing beer festivals. I think she's also joined the Indie Beer Show podcast, again, as a Latina. And so I didn't know Esthela personally. I knew her through mutual friends and acquaintances. And I said, David, well, I want to do this, but obviously I would need help. I would need someone who's, who would help us. And I thought of Esthela. She's Latina, she's female, she's from Barrio Logan. I reached out to some of my friends, and they gave me her contact. And within moments, she said, absolutely, I would love to be part of this. And one thing led to another. Our graphic designer put something really awesome together. And I said, well, let's see how much interest we get, if we post it out there and see how our customers respond. And the response was absolutely overwhelming. Everyone, all of our, female followers on Border X wanted to join. And that's when I knew that this was going to be something that was needed and that we were going to dig our heels into. And so that's pretty much how this started.
That's awesome. So Carmen, tell me a little bit about the club. You guys have been doing it a little more than a year. How have the members' relationships with beer developed? Has anyone gone on to a career in the beer industry at all?
Yes, absolutely. So the Mujeres Brew Club, I believe our first session started last year. I want to say May, and it was a 6-month series covering from the history of beer all the way to making a beer. And we actually made a beer together with Border X. And out of that, recently, I believe, I want to say immediately, yes, one of our mujeres has gone on to just recently get hired with Modern Times over at their new project out in Orange County. And so that's our most recent. And actually there's 2 more mujeres that have furthered their education in beer and have started their Cicerone. So those are some of the immediate ones that I can think of immediately, but it's funny because, some of the girls don't even, they don't tell me what they're doing, and so I find out and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is exciting. And so a lot of girls, I think that this has empowered them to go ahead and start to pursue jobs maybe in the beer industry.
That is awesome. So I know, we all chatted yesterday, and it's been pointed out recently that San Diego, for all its many, many craft breweries, doesn't have a single one that's solely owned by a woman. So what do you think a woman-led business can do to bring more women into the craft beer fold, particularly in San Diego?
Sure. So, I guess what they call me, that I was married into beer. That's how I'm categorized in the beer industry. And it's one of those things where I think a lot of women have ended up in that situation where, my background is real estate. So I've been in real estate the last 20 years. Wow. And so, having those strengths of marketing and a sense of urgency, I've been able to help David, the last few years and kind of be by his side. And it's a small business, it's family owned. Mm-hmm. So I think that even for David, and in the beginning, it was a little bit tricky, and where is my position, or how can I help, or, what can I do? And I think that there is kind of a misconception that even though it is the beer industry, there's a lot of things that women can do in the industry in general. The fact that there is no female-owned brewery in San Diego is actually pretty interesting. I mean, I kind of knew, but I think recently they were trying to write an article and find those women because again, we're not really showcased, and something that I've actually learned by doing this project, the Mujeres Brew Club, is that there are actually a lot of women in the beer industry, from brewers to, tasting room managers. I mean, of course, there's a lot of beer tenders, but there's a lot of women behind the scenes. And I think, creating this space, the Mujeres Brew House, and the attention that we've received, media and articles, we've already received requests from other women that they've been wanting to do something like this. And to hear that is something that is like, because of course, this is something new for me. I mean, this is something new for Esthela, it's something new for David. And we knew that it was a great idea. We all have ideas, but sometimes you don't know how great they are or how moving they're going to be in the industry. And just in the last week, I can say that this is something that was extremely needed, and it will give the confidence to other women that want to pursue opening up a brewery or doing more in the beer industry.
You're absolutely right. It's been my experience for almost a decade in the beer industry that there's tons of women in all sorts of roles everywhere. There are a lot of us. So I'm glad you guys have started the club to bring people together. So David, how will Border X foster an environment of encouragement and support without interference? I know that that's kind of a tricky needle to thread there. So what role will the company have in the venture moving forward?
No, absolutely. Great question. I think one of the reasons why we're supporting Mujeres Brew House is we believe that a brewery should be true to the people who are behind it. So when we started our brewery, we're Latinos, in California, and we were making European recipes, and it just didn't feel true to who we are. And so that's why you see a very different set of beers at Border X that you wouldn't see at other breweries. And that's what I expect to see at Mujeres. So they are not only going to manage the tap room in terms of internships and learning how to manage the business from serving to administrative and financial. And the way that Border X is going to partner with them is we'll manage the back of house, they manage front of house. And I truly mean it when I say I want to see what they come up with, because I think what's missing in the industry is there are women in the industry, but in a way they almost have to conform to the palates of the market as it exists today. And the opportunity these women have is no, they can make whatever beers they think are to the palate of their customers, because they're going to have both pieces, right? The making of the beers as well as the marketplace itself. So maybe they do choose to make a hazy IPA. Great for them, but that's not the end all be all of the possible beers that are out there in the world. And I hope they surprise us. I hope that my technical team will be in the back of house working with them to refine the recipes, but we're really looking for their inspiration, because that's how this is going to work. If it's just us and having this as a facade, then that's not going to work. It has to be genuine.
Dan, I want to bring you into the conversation here. Are we beginning to see meaningful progress on making this industry a little more inclusive than it's been in the past?
I think we are with women. I think there's been a lot of progress with women. And, if we're going to grow the market for beer, just, full stop beer, not craft beer versus, what we might call domestic beer or imported beer. If we're going to grow the market for beer, we have to make sure that the voices of all Americans essentially are represented in the industry. And we've done a good job, I think, at the brewery level of bringing women in. But to David's point, I'm not sure we've actually done a great job of making those voices heard, in terms of women having a balance of power, if you want to call it that, within breweries. I think that's something that has to be addressed. And we have to be realistic. We've done a really poor job of bringing people of color into beer. We just have. And we have to accept that. And we have to sort of step back and say, okay, why have we not brought those voices? Why have we not created power for people of color? Or why has that not happened? And how do we address that? And not just how do we listen or think about it, but how do we actually make sure that people of color are in the industry, in positions of power can make decisions and make sure that their perspectives and their view of the world, which is, you know, can't be the same, is definitely heard. So we made progress with women. I don't think we've made great progress with people of color. I think we got a ton of work to do there.
What do you think are some actionable things that craft brewery owners can do to, you know, level out that playing field, or bring in more people and balance that power?
It's pretty simple. I mean, in St. Louis, we were successful at bringing women into the organization for a long time and giving them a seat at the table where decisions were made. We've done that now at Heavy Seas, both in St. Louis and now here at Heavy Seas. I've not been successful at literally making sure that we're hiring people of color and putting them in positions of power. I don't see any other way of ensuring that we have those views at the table and therefore decisions that are affecting what we sell, where we sell it, what investments we make. Those views are not there at the moment.
So as far as, I guess I wonder is, we've seen a lot of upheaval in the last 4 months due to COVID-19. We've seen jobs wiped out. So I'm wondering, are we seeing, because it felt like this industry was making some strides, especially in craft, you know, the BA had, you know, pushed pretty hard to bring in a diversity ambassador and work on programs and meet craft breweries at the guild level and do those things. But I wonder if, you know, through this COVID-19 period where we've seen companies decimated and just in survival mode, if we've been forced, or if we've seen a setback, really. Do you feel like that is something that maybe is happening in this industry at the moment?
Depends what we do with it. You know, it depends what we do with the opportunity. On the one hand, this is going to be a very challenging time, whether it's for trade associations or for the brewers themselves. But from us, you know, if you look at society and what's going on in our country right now, there is definitely a sea change happening. So it's how do we, in the community, in the beer community, how do we take advantage of that opportunity? How do we push forward with making key hires and doing the things we have to do to make sure those voices are heard and have power within our organizations? It's as simple as that.
David,
how we approach it.
Yeah.
David, do you feel like we've seen sort of a setback in the last 4 months due to COVID?
Oh, I think it's still in play, to be honest. I mean, you know, we're in San Diego and LA, and LA has, you know, 5 million Latinos, and it also is home to one of the most active Latino homebrewer club. They're called SoCal Cerveceros, and those are spawning their own little, you know, breweries owned by Latinos, and so there's a movement afoot. And so yes, to answer your question, there's progress. But the thing is, like us, they are, you know, what's the formula? Hard work, sweat, and tears, not a whole lot of capital going on. So when you get that gut punch of COVID, I'm really fearful that, you know, a lot of these breweries are going to take a step back and we'll lose the little progress that we have achieved. And that even includes us. We're not impervious. We're accessing capital as best we can. But, you know, we don't have a buffer of cash reserves to last a year of this kind of situation. So I think in general, minority-owned businesses are in for a lot of challenges if this COVID pandemic continues as it has for the last 4 months. I'd say another 6 months of this kind of situation, and then I'll say we're going to lose some progress, significant progress.
So Carmen, with the club, I mean, what do members say their experience is like as Latina women who drink craft beer? What do they encounter out in the world?
I wouldn't say, I mean, you know, what's one thing that's interesting that we've learned at Border X, and this was after doing some research at the end of 2018 when we were planning our 2019 calendar of events and, you know, different things, because we do a lot at Border X. And one of the things that the owners and partners discovered was that the majority of our customers are women. And that was interesting because, I mean, I had no idea, I mean, it's like you see people in the brewery, but I mean, you don't really pay attention to, and we've heard it before from our musicians and artists, gosh, you guys have a lot of women here. And again, it's not something I've ever really paid attention to. And, like I mentioned, we started the Mujeres Brew Club because of Women's Month, but not just because of that. It's because we have a lot of females that come to Border X and drink Border X beer. And I think that's because of the types of beer that Border X makes. They're very flavorful. They're, we don't focus on lagers. We don't focus on IPAs. They're all beers with a lot of flavor. And of course, most other people in the industry can say, oh, that's, whatever they say, I don't know. But I mean, it's just not your typical, and it may not be true to style either. And with that being said, Border X has tapped into a customer base that of women, I'm going to specify to females, that they love the beer. They can drink it, they enjoy it. They might have been wine drinkers before, and now they're drinking craft beer. And the same goes for the Mujeres Brew Club. The reason why I think we've also been successful is because, again, these women feel comfortable and safe at Border X. They feel that some of these beers are for them. They enjoy it. And so now you add Mujeres Brew Club, and now you're educating these women. And now at this point, it's just empowering them. And what I've noticed and the feedback that I've heard from the girls is that being educated and empowered about craft beer, I mean, it's one thing to buy something and it's one thing to enjoy good quality beer. But now when someone's educated how to make that beer and you've actually had an opportunity to make craft beer that you never in your wildest dreams thought you would ever be doing, it's been nothing but good comments. All the women love it. They're excited, they're empowered. One other thing that's extremely important is every session includes a guest speaker and a guest brewery. So that means that this guest speaker is in the industry already. And typically, we look for females, but we also bring males in. And then the guest brewery brings in a beer so that the girls can try. And then that guest brewery introduces themselves to the Mujeres Brew Club. So with that being said, you've created now a personal invitation to your brewery. You may not be making beers that some of these women, would have ever explored or tried, but now that they've come from another brewery, gave them a special invitation, these women, Latinas, or any other color, feel empowered to go there now. They might have felt uncomfortable before. They might have felt like this is just not a space for me, or, it's too many guys, or it's too white, or whatever the case may be, because I know I feel like that too. So later when you see some of these women that went to these breweries and they post pictures and they went there and they're excited now because the brewery came and introduced themselves to them, they feel welcome there. And I think that overall, we've made progress just with that little bit there, is to make these women feel comfortable to be able to go into any brewery in San Diego and have a good time.
That's fantastic to hear. I just reminder for everybody viewing at home, want to remind you guys that you can send in questions for the panel. Text them to 617-336-8560. Carmen, I want to stick with you and toss you another question. So we just talked about how you think it's your beers that started to bring women in, and if you notice more and more women in the tap room. Now, piggybacking on something that Dan had said much earlier, is that if we want to grow the industry, the category, not even just craft, but just beer in general, like, we need to make the tent wider, and we need to bring in more women, more millennials, and legal drinking age Gen Z of color, because the same like white guys in their 20s and 30s are getting harder and harder to reach, and they really, as we've seen, are not particularly loyal. So as the marketing director at Border X, one of the ways that you can show your customer base what you guys are all about is through your all important Instagram page. What advice would you have for small brewers who maybe that's the only marketing tool they really have at their disposal? Like, what kind of images and messaging can and should they put out there to be able to show how welcoming and inclusive they are? What would you recommend they do?
Sure, that's a great question. I mean, I'm very selective of what I share on social media to represent BorderX. And it's not an easy task when it comes to marketing and really, defining what your brand is. But when it comes to diversity and really inviting, women and or people of color, it's one of those things where I'm not even sure I have the right answer for that. But I mean, for us, obviously, there's also a fine line with just us as BorderX is making sure, and even this is a challenge for me, making sure that we are keeping true to style to who we are as BorderX, which is a Latino brewery, period. And, making sure that we stay true to that is even a challenge, because sometimes we can go completely away from who we are because it's easy to do that. So I think, on the opposite spectrum, I do see breweries, making different styles beers, maybe a little more fruit, and I'm not saying all women like fruity beers, but, I do see some diversity. I do see, because I also follow a lot of breweries and I do see that they're doing a good job. I mean, what else can they do? To be honest with you, I don't know if I can answer that. I really don't know if I can answer that. I think we all are working hard to do it. I honestly don't have a solution. All I can say is that, for us, we, again, our customers are Latino and a lot of our marketing is focused to Latinos and that's it. I don't know, David, you want to maybe touch on that?
Yeah, I think she's so close to it that she's not aware of what she's bringing to the table, but she is very keen on the Instagram moment and really find, in Spanish they say, amor entra por los ojos, which means love enters through the eyes. And the Instagram moment is like that beer, what it looks like. So if it's just a glass, with the liquid in it, it looks okay. But she does little flourishes like on our La Poppy strawberry goza. She'll actually slice a little slice of strawberry and just put it on the side of the cup. And I know there's a lot of people in the craft beer industry that would say, oh my God, you've added a fruit to the, how dare you? But we have to get over ourselves. I mean, why do we paint this sandbox around ourselves and say we can only do these things? Frankly, she's gotten a lot of play. I think one of our most followed posts was simply putting a little rim of what was that cinnamon sugar on one of our chocolate stouts. People went nuts for it. I mean, it was our most followed post. And then our strawberry goza, which is our seasonal, also just putting a tiny slice of strawberry. I think if we're going to widen the tent, we also have to widen our thinking. We can't stay inside that sandbox. And I'm not sure why we paint it around ourselves, To us, flavor is everything, If it's delicious, drink it.
Where are we on the timeline of the Mujeres Brew House opening?
Carmen, you want to take that or?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So we are working to get all of our ABC stuff dialed in and our nonprofit status situated. But we do plan to open, even if we don't have beer brewed or ABC licensing, taken care of. Because again, this is supposed to be an educational space. So it's not so much come drink and, have a party type of thing. I mean, of course we want to get there, but we plan, my goal is to actually open our doors by next weekend. And that's with offering coffee. I think we've teamed up with Modern Times to offer cold brew. And then we'll have some, other beverages, Topo Chico. Obviously we love Topo Chico. So we've teamed up with Topo Chico. And we'll have some other non-alcoholic, probably Latino style beverages, agua frescas and different things. And we go ahead and just bring awareness to what we plan to do in the space. So my goal is to have like I wouldn't say soft opening, more of a kind of an open house starting next weekend.
Knowing that, we did get a question through the text line. If you do want to text, again, 617-336-8560. This question, is there consideration to create an extension of Mujeres Brew in other states, almost like chapters? Is that something, I realize you're not even open yet, but like, if it's successful, could we see this branch out?
Yes, absolutely. I think our second location, and I know again, and I just want to remind everybody because, you know, this was simply a conversation that Esthela and I were having. I just want to, I mean, I talked about the Mujeres Brew Club and how that started, but I don't think I covered on how the Mujeres Brew House idea started and evolved within like 24 hours. So we stopped the classes in March, I believe. So we had our first session in San Diego, but then our session in LA was canceled because COVID hit right in the middle of March. And so we weren't able to have our, I think it was the third session in LA. So we postponed all the classes for July. I thought, okay, well, this will take maybe 3 months, 4 months at the most, and we'll start back up in July. So a lot of these girls have pre-purchased their classes. So the classes range from $10 or to $15. I think we raised it in San Diego. It was 10, now it's 15. LA is 10. And the $10 includes merch, custom merch of the Mujeres Brew Club. So they get a tote, a t-shirt, a mug, or something. So it's not so much, you know, for Border X, it's more of, you know, that, and then obviously the host fee. But since I'm very, if I have a goal and a target, I try to accomplish them. So I started to have this sense of like, okay, what are we going to do? Either we cancel the Mujeres Brew Club in July so that we can update all the girls and, you know, maybe give them their money back or whatever that needs to happen. Or we do an online, you know, Zoom. But the problem with that is that the Mujeres Brew Club, the sessions are very hands-on and you're tasting beers and, you know, you're kind of, you know, it's this fun session. And I didn't feel that doing a Zoom online class was gonna be fulfilling. And so I was talking to Esthela, and we were deciding. I go, Esthela, we got to figure out what we're doing. July is coming up, and I said, what if we took over Alta Brewing? And you know, Alta Brewing has been closed for about 8 months now, and it's a smaller space. It's not very big. And she goes, oh my gosh, that would be insane. And I go, yeah. I go, you know. So we were just kind of dreaming. Esthela and I in the past have never talked about opening up a brewery or a brew house or anything for that matter. I'm gonna be honest with you. Last year, our goal has just been to make sure that our classes are a success. The one thing that we did add this year was a trip to Guadalajara. So we had 27 girls that booked a flight and we were all gonna go to Guadalajara in April. And that was to get inspiration for the beer that the girls were gonna brew for our summer release. And so that got postponed. We pushed that out to October. So we did that. And so Esthela and I are talking and she goes, well, that would cost so much money. And I'm like, yeah, I know, you're right. You know, and so we were just chatting. David overheard the conversation and we were on our way to LA again to go check on the brewery over there. So I was done with Esthela. We were done dreaming. And David overheard me and he says, well, let's talk about that some more. I'm like, okay. Again, you know, like the Mujeres Brew Club, it was just an idea. I didn't know what all that meant. And so David and I started, you know, having this conversation about what it could be. And he was actually very interested in the idea. And he thought that it was actually something that was interesting. I said, okay, all right, I guess so. And so anyway, so one thing led to another. And within 24 hours, we met with the owners and they were like, here are the keys. How can we help you guys do this? And that right there was just amazing. And anyway, it's just, I wanted to give you that information on that because I think it's important for our listeners and people that are interested, because we're getting calls now. It's like, why didn't you tell us? We would have helped you or we would have supported. It's like, well, this kind of just took one thing led to another and all of a sudden we have our own space. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, if I can just add, I mean, it was absolutely, I think I said absolutely. It makes sense. I mean, it literally took me a split second. And the funny thing is, everyone else we've ever talked to has the same reaction. It's like, why didn't we think of this before? It makes sense. The Premier Stainless Systems helped us out. That was their system inside. They gave us great terms. The building owners gave us great terms. And, you know, because right now is not exactly the right time to be expanding your brewery, but
Correct.
Because this had so much tremendous positivity, and people have come out of the woodwork. And I think the important thing is everyone gets it. And the word that keeps coming up in my mind is absolutely. Like as soon as we explain it to just about anybody, they're like, yeah, absolutely. Of course. How can we help? And or go ahead.
And I think, Justin, to answer your question, is that yes, we do want to expand. And yes, LA will be our second location simply because we have a large amount of women in that Mujeres Brew Club. And so if I was going to focus on expanding, the answer is yes,
Yeah.
we plan to expand, and that will be LA first.
And if I could add one last thing, I don't know if you caught it, but this isn't about Border X. All right. This is really about the mujeres and about empowering the local community of women in the industry as well as consumers. And so we are very open to the idea chapters and kind of eventually expanding. And I think it works because when she started the club, she said Esthela helped her out a lot, and that's true. What she didn't emphasize enough is a lot of other breweries and industry experts came out of the woodwork and made it a success. We had people,
Right.
university professors. I mean, the level of education that these students were receiving was top notch. These were owners of breweries, these were professors, these were, people in the industry. And I think it's for the same reason. It's for the good of all of us. If we're going to grow this industry, we have to grow the tent. And I think Mujeres is a very effective way of making that happen. And to answer your question, Justin, I think eventually we haven't gotten that far, but it would make total sense with the charter of the nonprofit.
That's fantastic, guys. We can't wait to see pictures. I really hope to be able to come out and visit one day soon. This is awesome. I'm so glad you're doing this. So let's shift gears a little bit. Dan, looking back at the last 4 months, many craft breweries have been struggling to stay afloat. So beyond just survival, when you look at the current state of the industry, what are the biggest issues facing brewers over the next 6 months?
Cash flow. It always comes down to cash. So every business is a little different. I think David spoke to it earlier. It is gonna all come down to cash flow. And I really can't say more about it than that, because there's so many different things that will play into it. And from a policy making standpoint, what our trade associations, I think, are focused on is exactly those things that can help breweries' immediate cash flow, and then looking beyond that. The biggest challenge will be those breweries, as David said earlier, if you're operating in your current structure, if you planned X amount of revenue and you're doing 50% of that, but your rent is geared towards that 100% of revenue, it becomes very challenging to continue on unless you can get some rent relief, for example, real rent relief. But the way our tax laws are structured for property owners, it's not really in their interest to restructure rent. They'd rather see the spaces go open. And that's a challenge, but that's the way our tax structure benefits property owners in a big way.
Yeah.
Justin, you're muted.
Of course I am. And I was saying to no one in particular that the challenges are stacking up, and they're growing more and more as we head into the latter half of this year. The Craft Beverage Modernization and Tax Reform Act is slated to sunset at the end of this year. And for our viewers out there in the industry, I'm sure you're well aware of this. This has been a big boon to just, when we talk about relief, that is tax relief that they've received. And I believe the Brewers Association has estimated that it's about $80 million annually. Mm-hmm. So with that coming up for a sunset, is that sort of job one on a policy level for the trade associations for the next 6 months?
Yes. And the great news is that the compromise that we struck between small brewers and big brewers years ago, and the trust we built, is still very much in place. And for the other initiatives, and there's probably 4 or 5 key initiatives for both trade associations to work together on, that basis of trust, we have to maintain that. And that's going to require constant dialogue between the brewers themselves, large and small, and between the trade associations. So there's a lot to think about long term for both trade associations, given what they've gone through with COVID, the COVID pandemic and its impact on the industry. But job one is definitely a reauthorization, and if we can get it, permanency. And just because of the nature of the beast, we're probably looking at the tax extender package that usually happens in December. This year it would be a lame duck session. We don't really see a vehicle right now, a tax vehicle for permanency. It's not going to happen in a COVID legislation. It's not going to happen in appropriations, which is the areas that Congress is working on. And there's not a whole lot of working days for Congress in an election year. So we're probably looking at something at the year end again. It is often described as this tax extenders package. There's always a chance, though, that we can, in that package, we can even try to get permanency for this. And there is support for it. So we're in pretty good shape where we have such bipartisan support, both Democrats and Republicans.
Well, I think you touched on my next question is, how receptive are lawmakers to extending this this package?
I think they're receptive to it. They know that it generates jobs, and in this case, we're going to hold on to jobs. And most lawmakers have realized that the structure of the US economy is based on keeping people attached to their employers. We have this crazy healthcare system where people's healthcare is attached to their employers. We have so much that happens when people dislocate from their employers, and we don't have a great safety net for large scale dislocation of employees from their company. So the PPP legislation was based on the experience that policymakers looked at from the Great Recession. One of the biggest challenges for the brewing industry is that most brewers, given the growth we've seen in the number of breweries in America in the past 10 years, most brewers have not weathered a recession. And so this is the first recession for many breweries, the majority of breweries in the United States. So that's a new experience for them, and all recessions are different, and this one is going to be very different.
Very different, absolutely. So David, as a taproom focused brewery, your business has been hit really hard with the initial wave of closures. And how big of a difference has legislation like CBM TRA made for your business? So I've heard people say it kombucha, but that is not going to work for me. So how has federal excise tax relief been working out for you guys? Have you found it to be helpful?
I don't deal with the taxes that directly. We have an account that does. Absolutely. I think the things that we've found most helpful, because you mentioned earlier about the COVID regulation changes and how we're able to use more open space. So the more local stuff has been the most impactful, because we'll be able to maintain cash flow, because cash flow is king. In our LA brewery, we're going to convert on a semi-permanent basis our parking lot, half of our parking lot, into an outside beer garden with a capacity for 100, which is pretty good size. And there's a chance that there's still a hunger for that brewery experience. And our hope is that we can still provide it in a safe way. And if we can, that's our best hope for financial resiliency, is to have that cash flow position preserved long-term.
Were you guys able to get any assistance through the Paycheck Protection Program?
Absolutely. That was a lifesaver. I think if that hadn't gone out, I think we'd be seeing all kinds of breweries having serious issues right now. So, but what hurt us is they said, spend it by June, the end of June. And so halfway through that period, we're like, oh, wait, we're just kidding. You have till December. So we went from a rabbit race to a tortoise race, right? And we took the remaining amount that wasn't committed, and now we're dosing it more carefully. We are pursuing the EIDL loan, EIDL, and we're hoping that will secure us for the rest of the year.
Dan, you mentioned the alignment of the trade associations on a lot of the major issues out there. And it would seem like we're in a period now where we've seen some of these regulations rolled back in various states, to allow, whether it's to-go sales, or in some cases shipments directly to consumers, or whatever it may be. Could that be a signal as, the state guilds and the associations such as the Brewers Association push for more permanence? Could that lead to sort of a tense moment among maybe some of the trade groups?
It could, especially if there's a vacuum of communication and people aren't talking about it. At the end of the day, brewers, big and small, want what consumers want. So if consumers want and are going to demand that some of the changes that we've seen in terms of direct shipping or relaxation around, licensing laws that David is speaking to, consumers want these things, and it's in everybody's interest to get there. And we can get to compromise as long as we're talking. What we found years ago with the fight over excise taxes, when we were fighting each other, essentially, was that we weren't really talking. And it was that vacuum that created problems. And once the brewers started speaking with each other and developing a level of trust, we were able to get the compromise, and we were able to get the bill passed. It took a decade. And we don't have that time this time. We're going to have to work faster, and we're going to have to really make sure that the brewers themselves are going to have to make sure that the trade associations are talking. And I think, the work that's been done recently on perishable goods, where the brewing industry has really taken a leadership role amongst other food and other food companies, whether it's dairy or others. We're still trying to get perishable some sort of relief for all the beer that had to be destroyed that came out of on-premise. We're still trying to get relief in this fourth piece of COVID legislation that's gonna pass sometime around the end of July. The August recess is a reality, and then we're voting. So there will be a fourth piece of legislation before the end of July, and both trade associations have taken a real leadership role amongst other food and beverage companies to try and get unmerchantable relief for the unmerchantable beer.
What would you put the odds on that being included in this package at this point?
It was like, yeah, every year, what are the odds of us getting the craft beverage bill through? Because of the effort and the alignment between all these different trade associations, there must be a dozen, almost 24 industries involved in this effort, looking at unmerchantable product. I mean, think about it this way: all of the food that was headed to restaurants in March was destroyed because it couldn't be pivoted into the grocery sector. And so there's a lot of issues around whether it's dairy or the meat processors, et cetera. So I think there's a shot because there's such an alignment around it. What it looks like in the end, whether it'll be perfect, creating perfect legislation in a pandemic is pretty tough. Usually these bills are going to pass, and then 6 months later, we're going to be moaning about the fact that the relief hasn't gone to the people it needs to get to. So it's tough to pass good policy in a pandemic, but I think there's a shot at that one. We did lose recently, last week, we lost the relief on excise taxes in terms of the delay. So we lost, the excise tax deferral, and that was tough. So, now the TTB is going to be looking for their tax payments, and that was a bit of a setback. But again, it was the setback resulted from the fact that imports were being treated differently. The customs and border folks were unwilling to defer payments on imports. And so that sort of forced the issue. And so that was a loss. And then the other thing that really concerns us right now is the tariffs that were taken away from aluminum on imports of can sheet and bulk aluminum from Canada. There's word that the Trump administration might put those back in place. That's going to push the Midwest premium back up, and that's going to put additional pressure on the can manufacturer. Not that we're already having problems with cans this summer, and that's just going to make it worse.
So speaking of the can shortage, it was something that we had covered yesterday. I mean, what else are you hearing about this from breweries around the country? Are people gonna take what's normally in a 12-ounce can and go to a 16-ounce can, or vice versa? How big of an issue is this for the industry?
16-ounce cans will be the problem, and slimline 12-ounce cans. You look at where the growth is, and that's where the problems are. When you take effectively 20 to 30% of all beer sold in America in kegs, I mean, we experienced it as Heavy Seas. We were 35% beer in cans as of March 13th, our beer in kegs. And on March 15th, we had to move 35% of our production into cans. And it was failure from the get-go. And we've made some improvements to where we're starting to see some real progress on recovering volume in total. But it's going to be the can sizes that are in demand, 16-ounce cans, especially bright cans, the ones that aren't pre-printed. And then those slimline cans are going to be tough, and that's probably going to last. I don't see it abating anytime this year. I think Ball just announced the construction of 2 new plants. We need those now, not a year from now.
Yeah, I think it's 2 new plants and then 2 new lines in existing plants. They expect them to be able to produce an additional 6 billion pieces, but not until the end of 2021. So that's not really that helpful. So the rest of Heavy Seas package portfolio, how does it split between can and bottle?
So going into the pandemic, as I said, we were 35% draft, and then we were 45%, call it, 45% bottle, 25% can. And that's flipped. So
wow.
On any given month right now, on a good day, we're 50-50 bottles and cans. But at certain times we're 60-40 cans to bottles.
David, what do you guys do at Border X? How is your can bottle split? Do you bottle at all?
We don't. So our whole business model is predicated on on-premise sales because of the profit margin, and we had large tasting rooms with capacity for 200, 250, and we always filled it. So we knew that distribution was a separate game, so we never quite developed our canning bottling side. We do crowlers, which was our saving grace, especially up in LA where it's only takeaway. But the crowler can market is, gone. I'm lucky, looking to see where I can get some more. And growlers I've had on orders now for months, and there's no release on the growlers either. So, if we continue in this mode, it's going to be painful because I know we're not going to be able to get packaging anymore, even if we have the beer.
Have you guys been able to bring in mobile canning at all, or are you just relying on your crowler steamer?
No, we've brought in a mobile canner, and they've done some larger runs of some of our core beers. But for variety, we rely on a manual canner, making case by case. And that's okay for our size right now. But the problem with both of those is you still have to get cans. So the struggle is real.
Absolutely. So
Dan, the Brewers Association recently went through a staff shakeup, including layoffs, and some of those moves have led to a lot of consternation with members of the BA, especially the layoff of Acacia Coast, who was a liaison to the guilds. But then the BA announced the hiring of Mark Cerini, who is one of the most powerful beverage alcohol lawyers out there, and they're bringing him in-house. And obviously this is a move that doesn't just happen overnight. This is something that's been in the works for months and months. That the timing just looks really, really bad, and you can't avoid that. As an observer now, as someone who sat on the BA board, what does the hiring of Cerini signal for that organization and its priorities moving forward?
The first, Justin, it's a great question, but the first thing that comes to mind is keeping Mark engaged in beer is the most important aspect of the hire. Whether Mark, no matter where he landed, keeping him on the beer team is critically important. And so what it says to me is that in the long term, the Brewers Association will be a stronger government affairs organization. Losing Acacia is a real loss. She did a fantastic job of connecting the guilds to each other and to sort of the core policies that we were focused on, primarily getting retail rights. You know, the vast majority of the growth in beer has come through taproom brewers over the past decade, and that wouldn't have happened if the folks at the BA and the guilds hadn't, you know, we had to continue that effort to try and make sure that there were retail rights in all 50 states. You know, before there was the BA, you know, we had to do that as individual brewers in individual states. And that was always difficult. I mean, we got it done. We got it done in states like Missouri and Maryland and, you know, all over the country, you know, as individual brewers working at the state legislative level. But keeping Mark on the beer team is the absolute most important signal. Mark is just so talented and has such a depth of knowledge. I think it's a really positive move for the industry.
So true. So David and Carmen, on the topic of legal affairs and regulatory issues, you guys know better than anybody how regulated our industry is. If you had a magic wand and could change one law right now that would help your business, what would it be?
Make permanent the COVID relaxation of the rules in the beer gardens. That would be number one, and I guess top of mind, and opening up Alta, knowing that we're in San Diego, you could apply for the licensing permit, and there was an automatic 30-day, you know, whether the administrative review was done or not, you had it. And so we're kind of worried how long is it going to take? Could be 60, could be 90 days to open up the new tasting room. And so you're just kind of paying money every month. So I guess those would be the two things I would be looking at, is making the changes more permanent and speeding up the licensing process.
Carmen, anything you want to add?
I agree with David.
We're running out of time here. So one last call out. If you have a question for our panel, please text us at 617-336-8560. We'll get those questions answered before we get out of here in 3 minutes. But before we go, Dan, we're just 4 months away from an election that could be a sea change for the country. And with that election, we could see the Democratic Party take over both the White House and the Senate. What are the implications for the beer industry should the Democrats reclaim both the White House and the Senate, or one of each?
Well, taxes are going to be the key issue. So permanency on the provisions in the craft beverage bill, getting that done sooner rather than later, I would say is critical. The country is going to need revenue at all levels. And so not only will the environment for taxes be challenging at the federal level, it's going to be very challenging at the state and local level. So we're going to have to figure out as an industry how not only to deal at the federal level, but work effectively across all 50 states, especially given how not only does the pandemic weaken the brewers and the guilds, but and brewers and the main trade associations, but the guilds are going to need support to be able to maintain their credibility, their effectiveness. I mean, for example, in California, Tom McCormick does an absolutely outstanding job, and there are resources available to the brewers in California, just given the nature of the industry there. But in other states, that's not the case. I saw where I believe all of the staff in Indiana, for example, have been furloughed by that guild. Without effective effort at the state level, we could see some significant tax increases at the state level, and that can be as impactful as anything we get done at the federal level.
Yeah.
So we're nearing the end of the supplemental unemployment insurance that was put in, that extra $600. It's going to end the end of this month. Cowen has estimated that there will be a 3% headwind to disposable income immediately on August 1st. So the beer category is proven to be recession resilient, not necessarily recession proof. But will we see a setback for trading up to more premium offerings like craft beer, things that cost a little bit more money, which obviously has the potential to hurt us? Or are we going to see another disaster relief bill passed before then? What do you think, Dan?
There will be, I believe there will end up being provisions in this fourth piece of legislation that will extend unemployment insurance benefit to some extent. Whether it's the same level, I can't speak to that. There may also be incentive for employers to bring employees back, so that, you know, or incentives for individual employees to again rejoin the workforce. So it's going to be a really tricky couple of months, and I think Lester Jones said it best a couple of weeks ago, or maybe even a month ago. This is going to look like a big giant bungee jump. One day it's going to look pretty good, and the next day it's not, and we just got to kind of roll with it and hope for the best, and work hard.
Yeah. David and Carmen, how do you guys view like the messaging that you need to convince customers, like this beer costs more, but it's worth more? How do you handle that messaging at a time like this?
Carmen, you're on mute.
Go ahead, David. I'll let you answer that.
You know, pricing is such a tricky thing. I was looking at an old picture when we first started our brewery near the border, and I saw on the menu board that our pints were like $4. I was like, what the hell were we thinking? And little by little, as we've created a better value proposition, you know, our pricing has come up to 7, 8, 9, depending on the style of beer. We've become more sophisticated, and you know, our customers are still coming back. If it wasn't for COVID, you know, well, in June, when it was relaxed a bit and people were able to dine in, you know, our business just bounced right back. It was like a bungee cord in a positive way. And so we're not thinking of changing our pricing too much. I think it's really just continue to provide value for dollar and have really differentiated experiences that people want. Because let's remember, it isn't just about the liquid. I think I joke that we're a little bit about mental health. People just want to sit down with their friends and enjoy a great beverage, and we're part of that. So, you know, obviously, as longer and deeper the recession goes, that starts to become more challenging. You know, we're not recession proof, but I think people hang on to that. So we're not going to change our pricing too much, at least for the foreseeable future. But, you know, check in 3 months and we'll see.
Makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the place where we got to end it. We're out of time for this week. Thank you to David, Dan, and Carmen for being here today. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. We will return next week, and Jess will tell you all about it.
Sure. So join us next week. We are going to have 5 guests, might be a Frontlines record, who are all working to make the beer industry far more inclusive. So we will have Brooklyn Brewery brewmaster Garrett Oliver. He'll be on to discuss his just launched Michael Jackson Foundation for Brewing and Distilling, which is going to provide scholarships for education to Black, Indigenous people of color to enter or advance within the brewing and distilling industries. Then we will have Tired Hands co-owner Julie Foster and Tired Hands brewer Christina Oliva, who will discuss their brewery's diversity brewing internship. Christina actually completed the internship herself and is now a full-time professional brewer there. The internship's goal is to give women and people of color hands-on experience in brewing. And last but definitely not least, we will have Jennifer Glanville from Boston Beer and Chula Vista Brewing founder Tim Parker. They are going to share more about Boston Beer's Brewing the American Dream program, which provides low-interest business loans to entrepreneurs in food and beverage. Often these businesses have a hard time getting capital from traditional banks. So BTAD is about 12 years old now and has been giving money to businesses across the country. But with that money, they also get access to the Boston Beer Employee Network for business coaching. They can call up and ask for help on any particular topic and get connected with a Boston Beer employee to talk through what their business needs are. I've taken many of those calls back in my old life. And BTAD also happens to have a special pipeline just for craft brewers through which Tim received a grant and a year of brewing and business mentoring. So we'll hear all about his experience with that. He's you guys' neighbor down in San Diego. You can find us in the same space next Thursday, July 16th, 3 p.m. Eastern. You can catch the replay on Brewbound's YouTube and Facebook pages, or as always, hear it on the Brewbound podcast. So thank you so much for hanging out with us, and we will see everybody next week.